My name's Monk Rowe, and we're in Orlando at the MLA conference, and I'm very happy to have Vincent Pelote with me today, Director of Operations at the Institute of Jazz Studies at Rutgers. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Monk.
You've been perking my ears up the last couple of days. I hear you talking to other people, and I can sense your passion for jazz. And I'm going to start out with an easy question.
Thank you. I like easy questions.
How about defining swing for us?
Nah, come on, man. Please tell me you're joking.
No, I'm not. But it did occur to me that with the big band the last couple nights, playing the tunes from that era of the 30s and stuff, that the solid rhythm underneath this those horn parts are so syncopated, and that the wonderful smooth sort of tension it creates is just astounding.
Yeah, exactly. And I like the fact that if you listen to the little figures that Fletcher Henderson or Horace Henderson, did as backgrounds to the soloists, I think they're wonderful. But then by themselves, just listening to those background figures, they're very nice.
And they're really tricky to play.
Yes, exactly.
It made me appreciate the arrangers and the cats that played those things.
Sure.
Because sometimes you read about the fact that maybe they all weren't great readers, but they did that stuff so well.
Yeah, yeah. And they also had section rehearsals. I'm sure they sat down and the sections just rehearsed. I mean, certainly that happened in Lunsfords band a lot, where the sections would just rehearse, their parts, and then when they came together, boom, they were ready to roll. So yeah, exactly. They want to make sure they got it right. Made it sound good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was I was doing a little poking around about you.
Oh.
And it was all good.
Oh, good.
There's a magazine you wrote maybe it was a column answers to your jazz history questions.
Oh no, Jazz Magazine out of Northport, New York.
Yeah. Okay.
Fragments was the column.
What kind of questions did people ask you?
All right. I was very young at the time. Okay, I was. In fact, Chris White was the director at the time, so we're talking 74, 75. I was still in college, wet behind the ears, just really sort of getting into the whole jazz thing. And the kind of questions that were sent were sort of like, I guess you call them trivia questions now. What recording did Ross on Roland Kirk play a sarrusophone on, or some things like that. And also, I will confess now that the magazine is defunct, that some of those questions were plants. I asked my brother to ask me a question, and I would put it in, or I would ask a friend to just send me a question or ask me a question, and I would include it. Because I didn't want to just make up something. I figured, so at least I could say legitimately that somebody asked me this, and they didn't at least send it in. Because we had to have a column, and sometimes nothing was coming in. We weren't getting any people writing anything in. And I will admit, there was one question that I wish to this day I could do over again. The answer, it was about Fletcher Henderson versus Benny Goodman. Why was Goodman successful playing the exact same arrangements that Fletcher Henderson played? And I was sort of into my, how can I put this? I was sort of into my black nationalist bag at that time, which, believe me, I'm nowhere near a black nationalist in any way, shape, or form, but at that time I was sort of sniffing around in that area. And of course I launched into this whole tirade about how, the black musicians were treated like crap, and Fletcher, his music was 20 times better than Benny Goodman's, but because he was black, Of course, what I didn't know or was aware of until much, much later was that, Henderson was paid very well for those arrangements. He was paid probably better than most arrangers were getting at that time, and Goodman loved him. Goodman considered him like a second father, really, and really took him in when he disbanded his band in '34, and put him basically on the payroll, and just had him churn out charts for him. A lot of them he didn't even use. He just put them in the library and never got back to performing them or recording them. But he gave the guy a steady gig. And then when the band disbanded later, when Fletcher reformed and then disbanded later, Goodman took him back in the organization. And that's how he ends up on those Charlie Christian Goodman things as the pianist, even though he had a perfectly good pianist in the band, Just Daisy, who he didn't use on any of those recordings. He gave it to Fletcher Henderson instead. Listen, I love the guy, but his piano playing at that point was really very old-fashioned, out of step.
He wasn't that effective a leader.
No, he wasn't. Not at all.
Yeah.
No, he just wasn't. They talk about that accident that happened, the car accident, in which after that he seemed very aloof and not really interested much in promoting the band very much. But even before that, I kind of wonder how much of a leader he really was. I mean, he didn't have an Irving Mills like Ellington had, or Cab Calloway, somebody like that. I mean, Hammond sort of came in at some point and sort of tried to take the band, do stuff with the band and stuff, and get them recording sessions. I think he did something for English Columbia and things like that. Mm-hmm. But there was no person pushing the Henderson band like Mills and those cats were doing, like Glazer was doing for Armstrong. And I think that was the problem with that band. Fletcher just wasn't a very good businessman. Just wasn't.
Well, a question I don't know if I would have had it back then, but I've never really been clear about Benny Goodman's role with this integration thing and how that happened. And you had said something to me yesterday about it, and Helen Dance had talked about her role in that.
Oh.
But what's your take on exactly how it happened?
Well, my take on it is what I've gotten from reading various books and and articles. So I mean, I wasn't there, so I can't say I have any firsthand knowledge. But I just got the impression that he wanted these two musicians in his organization. He wanted Wilson. He wanted Hampton. But he was smart enough to know that if he put them in the full big band, it was going to cause problems. Not that they weren't going to cause problems anyway, having them as a sideshow, but I think it caused less problems because they weren't sitting in the band with the rest of the musicians, and he could bring them out as a side act and then put them away when they're finished, and that was fine. It seemed to be acceptable, I guess, more so than if they were actually sitting in the band in the section. I don't know where Hampton would have sat because really there's no place for a vibe in those arrangements. But certainly, I mean, he carried two pianists. I mean, he had Stacy and he had Wilson, and I guess if he had his druthers, he probably would have had Wilson on piano for the whole thing. But because I'm just talking, I don't really know for sure. But that's how I kind of saw it. Like he wanted what he wanted, but he did it in a smart way. I think better than what Artie Shore did by sticking Eldridge in there and Kruper later with Eldridge sitting there and in the section and the shit they had to put up with, crap they had to put up with. Yeah. So.
Well, there sure are a lot of Benny Goodman stories.
Oh God, have I heard them? Tons of them.
Yes.
Yeah, and I can't figure it out why he was like he was. But I always tell people I think Terry Gibbs summed it up perfectly when he just said the man was crazy. the man was sugar. He was sugar. That's yeah.
I bet there's today there would be a designated psychological definition for what he was about.
Yeah. Very strange man. I'll tell you who has probably very good insight, and you should talk to him if you haven't already, is Lawrence Schoenberg at the Jazz Museum in Harlem. Because he worked for Benny for a number of years, and he got the full treatment. Everything from praise to damnation. Yeah. He got the whole thing. And Benny took his band away from him eventually. He took over Lawrence band.
Joe Wilder, he went on that tour to Russia. Joe would not even say Benny's name.
Yeah. Yeah.
That clarinet player would all he would say. Just wow. For Joe Wilder, who was like a gentle man.
Nice man. I knew him. I used to meet him in New York with Ed Berger. We used to
Yeah.
go see him play, and
Yeah.
he would come and talk to me at the table. Always ask me about my brother. I thought it was so funny.
Oh.
He met my brother maybe twice, and every time he saw me, he asked me, "How's your brother doing?" And I was so touched by that. And another musician who wouldn't mention Benny, because he had a run with Benny Goodman, was George Duvivier. Because I also, met him, and what he would do was he would always call Benny Carter Ben. He wouldn't call him Benny, because the connection to Benny Goodman.
Wow. You know what I loved about Joe, and I noticed it with Milt Hinton and other fellows of that generation, is they were such gentlemen. They were so nice,
Yeah.
but at the same time, if you disrespected them,
Mhm.
like in a business fashion, or you
Mhm.
accused them of, I witnessed this like a couple times.
Mhm.
Someone suggesting that they weren't living up to their obligation. They took the heat,
Yeah.
and they were, wait a minute, don't besmirch my professionalism.
Right.
And it was really good to witness that.
Yeah.
You can be a nice guy and also stand up for your.
I saw it with Benny Carter also. He played a club in New York, Carlos #1, I guess it was Carlos 1. It was a club that was on 6th Avenue, and he insisted on being paid in cash, and the guy said he would. The owner of the club said he would, and the guy was going to, go back on that after Benny had played. And Benny insisted, you give me my cash. I mean, this is what we agreed on. This is, you don't give me my cash, whatever. I don't know what the consequences would have been, but it was quite obvious that he was making Benny very angry, and you don't get Benny Carter angry. I mean, that's a side of Benny you don't want to see.
No kidding.
Yeah, all that stuff about him being a gentleman and all that stuff. Yeah, he is. But don't rile him. Don't mess with him. Really. He got his cash. Believe me, he got it. At the end of the night, he got his cash. So, yep.
So I saw a video of you, I guess it was taken at the Association of Recorded Sound Collections.
Oh, God.
It was nice. And you were saying different people collect different things.
Yes.
We all have our passions.
Sure.
So what was your passion as a young man?
My passion as a young man was always, I like most kids, I listened to the popular music of the day. I had my little transistor radio. Remember the little 9
yes,
transistor radios you used to put to your ear, or you had the one ear
earphone.
phone that stuck in. Yeah, so I had that, and I generally listened to the black stations on the other end of the dial, so, WWRL and so on. And I like, Motown and all that. But then, my uncle, Lester Pelote, was a professional jazz guitarist in New York. He never really broke out of the local scene, and eventually became a cab driver, and that was pretty much it. But he used to come to the house a lot in Jersey City and visit his brother, my father. And I got interested in guitar at that point. And my father, who wasn't a musician, but who liked jazz, and had really 2 jazz albums that he played consistently, especially when he was a little drunk. He played the West Montgomery Trio on Riverside label, the first album that Wes ever made, and an album that Al Casey made called Buck Jumpin' on Swingville Prestige. And he played those 2 records over and over and over again, to the point where, my sisters were complaining about, stop it, but I started listening to them, and to me, as a budding guitarist, because I was interested in playing guitar because of my uncle, so I was futzing around with it. I was listening to this, and I said, I like Wes. Al Casey's more approachable. I can copy him better, because it was mostly single note stuff, and it was a simpler style, a simpler single string style, because he goes back to the 30s, and Wes was more of a post bop guitarist, even though he started out playing Charlie Christian solos. And so his stuff was harder, and the octave thing was just completely out of my. I didn't know what the hell was even going on with that. And of course, soloing in chords using block chords was completely like, So I fell in love with the Al Casey album first, but then I started listening to more and more Wes, and he became my hero. And so my passion became that, and also again I have to point my sister's collection. She had the record Hello Dolly in her 45 collection. Now, I know it was a big hit in '64, I believe it knocked the Beatles off the chart that year. But, I didn't really dig the record until 1966, 67, 66. And I started playing it and listening to it, and I liked it. I liked the other side better, by the way. A lot of living to do was the other side of that record, 45. But, I listened to it, and I knew about Armstrong. I knew he was supposed to be this great musician, but by 67, 68, 68, 67, he was just appearing on shows, and he had the handkerchief, and he didn't play much trumpet at that point, and I was just kind of wondering, like, what's so great about this guy? I mean, everybody thinks he's so wonderful, because Hello Dolly was nice, but I didn't see it as anything that really knocked me out. So I went to the local library in Jersey City, the Fine Arts Library, and I pulled out an album that had an old track of Armstrong playing Big Butter and Eggman from the West with the Hot Five, and I listened to it. And now, don't ask me why, but as a kid, I must have been 14 or 13, when he took that solo at the end of that record after the vocal, I just perked. I was just like, wow, now I get it. I can see why he's great, because I don't think anybody else was playing like that. And I didn't know that for a fact, because I wasn't immersed in that time period of music, but something about it just sounded so modern and different than anything that preceded it. And the setting just seemed weird, that this archaic sounding recording had this great stuff coming out of it. And so I just started trying to find as much jazz from that time period as I could. And so back to the Five Corners Library, pulling out more records. They let you take LPs out, and you can take them home and play them and bring them back. And I had an old Wallensack open reel tape recorder, and I used to record the records after I got them, and then I just play the Wallensack tapes back over and over and over again. And so my passion really became early jazz, circa 1920s, 30s, and up to the bop era. A little later, I started getting into bop. But that's how I did it. I went back to the beginning, and I worked my way up to the modern jazz eventually. And I loved Bird when I finally heard Bird, and I didn't find it all that radical when I heard him, because I guess I've been listening to stuff that post bop that was sort of in your head anyway. So I used to say, I don't know why swing people were so crazy. It sounds perfectly logical to me what he was doing,
Yeah.
But then I read that they weren't happy with the bop stuff. They thought it was weird and Chinese music, Dizzy Gillespie called it, and all that stuff. And I didn't get it. It sounded fine to me. But anyway, that was my passion. My passion was.
So you weren't a moldy fig.
No, I wasn't a moldy fig at all. I love bop and beyond.
It's
cool.
very curious how one thing leads to another, sometimes backwards.
Yeah.
Yeah. I made the mistake of buying Home by John Coltrane when someone told me about John Coltrane. It wasn't the right record to get.
No.
And
No.
so it took me some time to either put another Coltrane record on.
Sure. Yep.
And so do you pursue this in higher education? How did this passion delve into a career?
Okay. When I went to college, I played guitar all throughout high school, pretty much on my own. I mean, I was a self-taught guitar player. I didn't take lessons. And I just listened a lot. I got the Mel Bay books for guitar, and I went through the whole chord system so I could have a system. I didn't just want a bunch of chords. I wanted a system so that I could, play whatever was put in front of me by just using this system. So I did that, and of course I since learned I was playing these crazy chords I didn't have to play with it. It's another story. And I fell in love, of course, with the whole concept of playing in a rhythm section and just playing chords. To me, that was the greatest thing in the world, that somebody would devote themselves to just doing that. I mean, Eddie Condon was my hero. I loved Eddie Condon for just sitting there and doing that, and Freddie Green, of course.
Yeah.
But there were other rhythm guitars. Everybody talks about Freddie Green, but there's other ways to play rhythm guitar. His is not the only way. I mean, Marty Gross makes that quite clear today, that there are other types of rhythm guitar that you can play. I mean, Dick McDonald was a wonderful rhythm guitarist, as were, I can just remember rattle off a bunch of them. It was Clayton Sunshine Dewar, who played with, Louis Prima, or Mez Mesro, who played Mez Mesro in his orchestra. And so there were a whole bunch of guys like that. They were just great rhythm guitar players without necessarily sounding like Freddie Green. But so that became my passion. And so I went to college to be basically, I wanted to be a writer originally, but I went on the wrong day. So there was no on the orientation day, so there was nobody from the English department there, but there was a guy from the music department. So I went over to him. His name was Chester Fanning Smith. He was a classical pianist.
And this was at what school?
This was Rutgers University in Newark.
Oh.
Yeah, right. So I went over there because I got accepted to Rutgers. So I figured, okay, fine, this is good. I'll go to Rutgers and be a English major. But anyway, he talked to me and he said, there's a lot of things you can do with a music degree. And he was trying to talk to me about becoming part of the department. And he gave me this sheet of paper that had all the different types of jobs you could get if you got a music degree. And I was floored because I figured the only thing you could do with music is play. And I didn't think I was good enough to be a performer. And so I looked at it and said, hey, not bad. So I signed up to be a music major. and I told him, I said, I really don't know anything about classical music, but I love jazz. I mean, if you guys don't mind me being a jazz guy, is it okay? And he was like, sure, no problem, come on in, So I did it, and I don't know, I mean, all through the 4 years that I was there, 4.5 years, I was in this constant fight where they were doing the classical thing. In fact, I remember for my audition to be in I guess, the choir, they wanted you to sing a song, and so they were all singing these classical things. I chose Moonlight Serenade. That was my audition piece, because I knew Glenn Miller had done it.
Caro Mio Ben, right?
I taught this poor young lady to play piano behind me at this thing, and I was terrible. I mean, I'm not a singer. I am horrible. And she put up with that. And today, we still joke about it today. Sitting in the practice room and her trying to coach me into doing this. And another thing I did with the jazz thing was in the orchestration class, we were given a little piece of music to orchestrate, and while they're all doing classical things, I orchestrated a Duke Ellington thing. So every chance I got, I tried to work that into my back, education, and it just never left me. I mean, it just stuck. So I settled on being a music ed teacher because I figured, all right, I would get out, I would probably get a stage band or a jazz band, a high school level thing, and I could do that, because I didn't want to be a vocal teacher. I didn't want to do the vocal choir thing. I wanted to do a band thing. So I figured that would be that was going to be my thing. I was going to just be that. And maybe that's where I'd be today if Ed Berger hadn't called me and said, Vinny, there's a job at the Institute. We have a 2-year grant to catalog sound recordings, and we need somebody to know something about jazz. We'll teach you how to catalog, but we just need the jazz expertise, and I know you have it. Do you want to leave teaching and do this for 2 years? I said, yes, take me away, because I'd been substitute teaching it was like horrible. The kids were terrible. I couldn't stand it anymore. And I said, I'll take it. I'll take it for 2 years. We'll see what happens. So I did, and it was the first time that anybody had done a catalog project of that nature for jazz music on a national database. Wow. And that was OCLC at the time. That was the only national database that was really out there. And so that's how I got started. That's really where the whole thing started. And I just never left, because once the grant was out, they applied for another one to do LPs. First it was 78s, then it was LPs, so I did that. And then after that, we just sort of killed the whole thing. And they realized, Vinny knows more than just, out of catalog sound recording. He knows a lot about jazz, so they kept me on and just kept moving me from one thing to another.
Yeah, you were learning on the job.
Yeah, actually. And eventually I got a degree. I went down to New Brunswick's library school. I got my degree in library science. Okay. And then I was able to get the job that the librarian there had before me. And in fact, it was her. She, in fact, told me, you should get the degree because I'm going to retire soon, and you'll probably be the perfect replacement if you get your degree. Right. So I did. And I don't recommend people getting a degree just for for one job. Because I mean, if I didn't get that job, I didn't know what I would have done because I didn't want to do anything else. I didn't want to be a music librarian in some other institution. I wanted to be in the Institute of Jazz Studies, and if I didn't get that job, I don't know what I would have done. But that's weird. I mean, it just worked out, but it was a gamble. It was a big gamble.
Well, I can attest that it's a pretty cool place.
It's a wonderful place. It's always been, and it's still
what is the what's the coolest thing in the collection as far as you're concerned?
As far as I'm concerned, oh God, there's just so many things. I mean, but I guess I'd have to say the coolest thing is Lester Young's tenor saxophone.
That's what I would have said. I only there one time, but I said, oh, look.
Yeah, man. There's something magical about it, man. I just look at it and just I could see him holding it, and that weird way he held the sax and everything, and those beautiful sounds coming out of that horn, man. And I'm not even a horn player, man, but I appreciate Prez, man.
I love that moment that they captured on the Sound of Jazz when with Billy and
the face on her when he's playing that solo. I mean, she's just like,
I finally just about a month ago, I finally sat down and tried to write out his solo. You know, and it just compared to doing some transcription, it's not that hard.
Yeah.
But it's so it's so perfect.
Yeah.
It's just.
Yeah. And it's just amazing. I mean, I remember you showing a film when you asked somebody about, what do they think about when they improvise. I think it was Bill Charlotte.
Yeah.
And his answer was actually perfect. I mean, I guess you really don't sit down thinking, all right, I'm going to go from a C7 now to, I'm going to make the third go here. Because how can you? I mean, you can't. I mean, well, you're an improviser, so just it's just so ingrained in you. It's like breathing, I guess. And I guess that was Prez, man. He just it's beautiful music just came out of that horn, man. It's great stuff. The other cool thing I would say, and this is because I am a guitarist, we have one of Eddie Condon's guitars. It's a 4-string tenor guitar, and I just think that's great. Because I would have loved to have been in here playing away on that thing,
I love reading about those guys, like in Bill Crow's book. He's
got great stories.
The jazz life.
Yes.
And sometimes you wonder where. Well, that's another subject about then and now.
Right.
I cracked up at the rehearsal. I think it was last night.
Okay.
Because there's one guy was going to say, he was saying, we're going to take a donation. Collect a little money, take a donation for some of the ringers.
Yeah.
So he says, we're taking a donation, and someone said, do you take 78s?
That's right.
How perfect is that? What to do with the 78s?
Oh God, we get that almost every day. My father just died, whatever. He had a collection of 78s. Mostly it's LPs that they want to give us. And they're so convinced these are the greatest, most unique collection in the world. Well, it's got lots of Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington and Count Basie. And I hate to always tell them, these are kind of common LPs. We probably have every one of them that he had in his collection too, and we just can't take them because we have no space. The space is not there. I mean, so.
Does anybody ever use them?
Yes. People do.
That's good.
People do come in here. And I was shocked one day when somebody came in, just one of the community people in Newark community, because we're open to everybody. We're not just open to students. It's open for anybody. He came in and he wanted to hear Miles Davis recording, but he said, I don't want to hear the CD. I want to hear the LP. And so I did a double take and said, but you sure? I mean, it's the same record. No. I said, no. I want to hear the LP. The LP sounds different. So I got in the LP, and he was happy as a clam. Yeah. But that's so rare. Really, that somebody is that insistent on listening to an LP. Mm-hmm. A lot of times we give people LPs because there are no CD equivalents, and that's still unfortunately the truth. And I hate to hear about the impending death of the CD, because not everything has been switched over. There's still LPs that you'll never see on CD. And that's a shame if CDs are going to die.
Oh, right. They're not going to make them anymore.
Yeah, and downloading, I'm sorry, maybe this just paints me as the old fogey that I am. I do not like downloading. I just don't. I don't.
I agree.
Don't care for it at all.
And I got a good deal of my jazz education from reading liner notes.
Yes.
you know, you're in the record store and you're
Mhm.
reading and you learn who writes, who do you agree with?
Sure.
So I'm gonna buy this because this person says this thing about it.
Yep.
Um,
Yep. One of the first things I told Dan Morgenstern when I knew he was into the Jazz Studies director was, you know how many records I bought strictly on the fact that you said this was a great record? And he gets all sheepish and everything.
Yeah,
and
I'm
all.
just gonna say,
Yeah.
well, I hope you like them then.
Listen, Dan, you're the man, you know.
Who are the most, I don't know, short list of the most interesting people you've met doing your work?
Well, I didn't meet him, but I did some work for him, long distance work for him. I did some work on Leonard Feather's book, Ear Witness to an Era, I think was his last book. And he couldn't come out to the Institute, so he sort of hired me to do some digging and stuff. And he paid me nicely, sent me a check and everything. But I knew of him, I knew about him from reading and all that. And I knew all the great things he did in terms of promoting the music and everything. And so I was very happy and proud to have worked for Leonard Feather. As far as meeting other people, Gunther Schuller, I met Gunther Schuller, who I thought was one of the nicest people ever. He was doing some work on his book, The Swing Era. He came in pulled out a ton of LPs and sat down and listened to these things over and over and over again, which was great. I really enjoyed him. And believe it or not, I met him at the Institute, Bennett Lester Carter, Benny Carter. He came over, the Ed Berger connection. Ed's father wrote the definitive biography of Benny Carter, and Ed wrote the discography. It was a 2-volume thing. The first volume was the history of Benny Carter biography. The discography was the second volume, and Ed did that whole thing. And it was wonderful. It was the second, I thought, comprehensive discography in an artist at that time. The first one being Hendersonia, Walter C. Allen's book, which is huge. But it's a biodiscography of Fletcher Henderson that Walter C. Allen must have worked on forever. But it came out first, and then Benny's book came out with Ed's discography, which was just as comprehensive as anything Walter Allen did, maybe even more so in some ways. But so when Benny came to the Institute, I even remember the first stupid question I asked him. I wish I could have taken that back. I said, "Well, Benny, I'm trying to show him I know a little something about jazz." I think I might have called him Mr. Carter even. I wasn't that comfortable with him yet. And I said, "Mr. Carter, could you sit down and tell me when the switch over from tuba and banjo, the switch over to bass and guitar, when did that happen exactly? Like there was an exact date that this happened, it's a magical date." And he looked at me like I had 3 heads, but but he was such a nice guy. He didn't say, "What a stupid question." He just said, "Well," he said, "some arrangements called for tuba and banjo, and some arrangements called for bass and guitar." And that pretty much was it. Like there was no magical moment when this happened. It just sort of evolved in time, and yeah, I guess he was right.
Yes, I know. It's like you want those things to have this, like, when did music switch back to straight eighth notes? Well, the day Chuck Berry. I mean, you want this thing to be compartmentalized a little bit.
You do. The other interesting person I met there was also Walter Gill Fuller, the arranger for Dizzy Gillespie.
Yeah.
He took a liking to me. I don't know why, but he sort of took me under his wing, and he took me out to lunch many times, and basically he just poured out his life story to me. He felt like he'd been basically forgotten. He was very proud of the one article that talked about him. Leonard Feather wrote the article, in fact, about Gill Fuller, and he was very proud of that article because at least somebody recognized his talents. And he was telling me all the things he did and that he didn't get credit for. And of course, I found out later that he also was a fantastic liar in a lot of ways and exaggerator. And he exaggerated a lot of his accomplishments. And I don't know what degree he did, but I have since found out that certain things he said he did, he really didn't do, or he farmed out certain things to other arrangers, which I guess they all did. Quincy Jones did it. They all kind of did it. He was very opinionated. There were certain people who he just did not care for, stylistically or whatever. He had a bug up his butt about Tad Dameron for some reason. He really didn't think Tad Dameron was all that great an arranger. And in fact, he said to me, if you listen to Hot House, he says, really listen to Hot House. He says, does that sound like something Tad Dameron would have done? He said, that sounds more to me like Charlie Parker might have wrote that, and that Dameron took credit for that, you know. And, you know, because he said, you know, Dameron did things like Good Bait, da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da. He would hum that to me, and they would say, now listen to the, you know, Hot House, and tell me, you know, come on, it can't be Tad Dameron, you know. And then, you know, so he loved Cy Oliver. He loved a guy named Phil Moore. He's very in love with him. He loved Quincy Jones, so Quincy Jones was okay. And he said he did some work for Benny Goodman, and oh no, he said he was approached by Benny Goodman to do arrangements for the big band, but he turned it down and gave it to Chico O'Farrell. Now, I've heard Chico O'Farrell talk about that, and not once did he ever mention Gill Fuller giving him that job. So I kind of wonder what that was all about, too. So, yeah, but you know, Gill was interesting. I mean, a lot of what he said was true. I mean, a lot of the things he'd said, I mean, the whole thing with, you know, writing things to come and stuff like that. I mean,
yeah,
that was all his.
I have a picture of an LP I had, Last Train from Overbrook, or something. I think it was James Moody.
Yeah. Well, he did the Moody arrangements for the Monterey Jazz Festival. Remember that? There were 2 albums that came out because he was in charge of the Monterey Jazz Festival Orchestra for a while. And he did the Gillespie one, and then he did the Moody one. And those were his arrangements. Yeah. And I've yet to hear anybody dispute that. So I don't know, maybe somebody will at some point. But he said he did those. And they're wonderful albums, both of them. Yeah.
Okay, you recall the downbeat blindfold tests?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to give you.
Uh-oh.
I think I am.
Oh, here's where my expertise goes down the toilet. Ed would do this to me all the time. He always bring in some record and just like, come on, pull out, tell me something. I'm sure he does. It sounds like King Oliver's band.
That's right.
Creole Jazz Band. I can't name the title, but I know that's the Creole Jazz Band.
Yeah. Sabin.
Oh, that's Sabin Blues. Yeah. Okay. All right.
I love the picture. I wish I could have been a fly on the wall.
Oh, yeah.
Picture them in the studio playing to that megaphone and stuff.
I would love to see that too. God, because from what I heard or read, you know, Armstrong was so powerful that they had to put him in the back of the room. And really, Oliver was up in the front. Because that's the only way he could balance it. Really. It must have been wild.
Yeah. All right. How about this one?
Okay. Oh, yeah. I don't know what take. But it's Jimmy Lunsford and his orchestra, with him as our business. Yeah. But there are 2 takes. I can't tell you which one.
Okay, that's
Phil Schaap could tell you.
Phil Schaap could tell us.
Yeah, Phil Schaap could tell you easily. But I can't. Oh, I love that band, man. Listen to that. They were so clean. I mean, it's just like, wow.
They really captured the string bass.
Yes. Yeah. Well, some leaders were smart enough to push that bass up front, and Ellington does the same thing. You can always hear the bass on an Ellington recording, and same thing with Lunsford. Fletcher, not so much. Fletcher wasn't really that hip with the recording thing, but Ellington was, and so was Lunsford, and their recordings are wonderful. But I just always marvel at how clean that band was. I mean,
apparently a lot of showmanship.
Yes.
Too.
Yes, exactly. Exactly, with the horns going up and tossing the hats up and stuff. That's great stuff, man. It's
Did
visual.
you ever think you were born in the wrong era?
Oh, definitely. Oh, damn, was I born in the wrong era? Oh, God, was I born in the wrong era? I would have loved to have been a part of that. But like my father always said, he said, those weren't the good old days. Those were the bad old days.
That was sort of a,
Yeah.
I wondered, is there a good old days in, but why would he have said that?
Because of the racial
Yeah.
stuff that was going on at the time. He was very aware of that. And while he never sat down and talked about any individual instances or episodes that he encountered, he never really talked about those days in a nostalgic sense or in any way, shape, or form. He always said, it's better now. Things are better now. So I guess...
And he would have said that about when?
He said that
in the 60s?
I would say as late as the 1970s.
Okay.
Yeah. And one of the biggest regrets, other than the fact that I lost my father, he died in 72, I believe, was that he didn't live long enough to see Barack Obama become president of the United States. Because he used to always tell me, there's no way in hell a black man's going to be president of the United States of America. He would not have believed it. He would never have believed it. And I would have loved for him to see that. And I would say, see, Pop, it did happen, Pop. It would have been great. Yeah, but that's it. You're right. I mean, musically speaking, that's where my heart really is. Now, I love modern. I love everything bop and beyond. I'm a big Eric Dolphy fan, for instance. I love Eric Dolphy. I love Coltrane. I love, I just heard some Marty Ehrlich that I thought was fantastic. I mean, so, I like some out stuff. I dig Ornette. I dig, people, Jimmy Lyons. But really, my heart is in the old. I really love those old big bands and the swing guys, and that's my thing, man. In fact, the charts that you'd see in our big band that are from that time, I was probably responsible for.
That's what I started to gather.
Getting
that's
those in there.
Partly why I wanted to talk to you. And
Yeah. And they rebel. We can't keep playing this old stuff. We got to play something more modern. But see, the reason why I brought the old stuff into the band was because I thought, okay, our level of expertise, this is probably about all we can really handle comfortably. Plus, if you play them right, they swing on their own, man. I mean, they sound good. Even today, they sound good. If you play it right and you got the right feeling behind it and you hit the notes,
Yeah. And I have an internal debate sometimes when you're playing them and the tenor player stands up to solo and is playing like they're in the Tower of Power.
Yeah.
And, well,
I'm with you on that one too. It's like, come on, man, come on.
Either it's almost better that they don't know that this doesn't fit. Because if they know it doesn't fit, then they think they're making a bad musical decision.
Yeah, exactly. And also if you take them to task, you also have to sort of take the drummer to task because, I mean, chances are the drummers in those bands weren't keeping time on the hi-hat or whatever. They were probably using the bass drum more. And,
right.
It's a whole different feel actually. I don't think anybody today really knows how those drummers, felt time.
Yep.
The bop thing has taken over, so everybody plays like a bop drummer now, even the swing guys.
Yeah.
So it's just the way it is.
Well,
Even the bass players are pushing more than they did in those days. I think it's not this. You don't get the same kind of feel. Or I shouldn't say push. I think they're more laid back now. I think they pushed more in those days. They were more in your face.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you can hardly find any guitarists that want to just play rhythm. They just don't want to do that. In fact, I had a guitar teacher, Remo Palmier, who said to me, I don't do that four to the bar nonsense. He said, I don't.
Wow, he called it nonsense?
Yeah, he didn't think that was cool. He said, that's old fashioned. He said, that's from another time. So when he would play in a big band, he wouldn't do the four to the bar. He did like sort of comping and that kind of thing, or he didn't play rhythm at all.
Bucky Pizzarelli said something that made a lot of sense to me. I asked him about, especially the early Basie band, why they were so good. And he said, well, the drummer and the rhythm section, but especially the drummer, didn't try to hit every kick
Right.
that the horns were playing.
Yes.
Because if you do, then you don't have the back and forth.
Yeah.
And after he said that, I said, well, yes, of course.
Yeah, he's right.
But so if you get in front of a high school band and they have those drum parts that are so, there's way too much in them,
Yeah.
and the poor drummers are trying to hit everything, and you just take the music away. And
Yeah.
just,
Yeah. That happened in a Benny Carter session actually with Kenny Washington was playing drums and he was trying to find out how many he was trying to do that, get all the hits, and I think at some point Benny kind of got frustrated with him and just said don't bother with all that nonsense, just play the drums, just play the drums, that's all, just sit there and play the drums, man. Just lay down the rhythm, that's all I need,
Gee.
It's interesting stuff.
What's on your desert island playlist?
The old desert island
Yeah.
playlist. I should always think about that more because, and of course it changes all the
Yes.
time. I mean, of course I'd have to have a Wes Montgomery record. And as to what my favorite one is kind of hard to say because I like all of them. Even the Creed Taylor stuff that he did later with the California Dreamin' and that stuff. But I guess if I had to pick one, I'd probably pick the Incredible Jazz Guitar, Wes Montgomery. That's what anybody says is probably the best one. I have to have some Armstrong. I definitely gotta have Armstrong. I mean, I don't even know which album for that. I guess I would just pick a 78 maybe. And one of my favorites was, there were two. His big band version of Strutting with Some Barbecue is fantastic.
Oh.
The Decca version of that, it's, oh my God. And also Wolverine Blues that he does later. Big Sid Catlett playing drums behind him, man. That's a kick-ass record. So both of them, I would take one or the other. I had another one just took my tongue. Oh, we listened to it last night. I would take Benny Carter's Further Definitions album with me, Desert Island, because that is a great record. It's only about 35 minutes long, but it's great. I mean, there's not a track on there that you go, ew, or you're waiting for it to get over to get to the next track. Every track is perfect. I just love that record.
Yeah.
So I guess those are enough.
Okay, yeah.
Maybe I'll take a Dick Beiderbecke record also. I love Dick's.
Yeah.
And I guess I would take, what's the one with Dix and his gang? Come on, Benny, I know it. It's not Thou Swell, but it's one of the Dix and his gang ones. But can't think of the name now. But yeah, I got flack for liking Dix actually because it's
From whom?
From people who go like, well, what's so great about Dix? I mean, a lot of modern trumpeters listen to him and they don't see what the big deal is. And I guess because they've heard so many Bix imitators now that they don't realize that he was the source. It starts with him. They're all imitating him, basically. So it's like you've heard so many of the imitators, you can't appreciate the real thing when you hear it. So that's the problem.
Did you ever meet Randy Sandke?
I love Randy Sandke.
He named his kid Bix.
Yes, he brought him to the Institute just recently.
Really? Awesome.
Yeah, good old Bix.
Jeez.
Yeah, he's wild. And there's a case of a guy who, I mean, and this is where I think, I got a lot of musicians should sort of follow his lead. I mean, he can play the old stuff, but have you heard some of his more out stuff?
Yeah, and his writing.
Yes.
Yeah, he did the thing with viols or old time string instruments.
Yeah.
Yes.
He can do the whole gamut.
Yeah.
And he's a hell of a musician.
Yeah.
Definitely is.
Are there any jazz myths that bug you?
Yeah. I'll tell you one right away. That the black musicians are better than the white musicians. I've heard that forever. We had a guy that worked at the Institute, John Clement, British. He would say English. He didn't like the idea of being part of the British Empire.
Oh, okay.
He thought English. I'm English, he'd always say. He always felt that black musicians were superior to white musicians. And I've heard that nonsense for I don't know how long. And I know the famous story about Roy saying he could tell a white, right? And he couldn't. When they actually did it, he couldn't do it.
Right.
And I'm sorry, man, but you cannot tell me that Buddy Berrigan ain't bad. Buddy Berryman's bad. All right? Man, Benny Goodman can play. Artie Shaw can play. I mean, all these cats, P. Russell can play. I'm sorry, you can't tell me black musicians are superior when you got cats like that. And that goes true for today. I mean, to me, the whole... Now, I'm one of those who do feel that jazz is a black music. I mean, I know I've heard that controversy also, that it's not. But no, I think it is, based primarily on the fact that, you know, if you look at its main movers and shakers, they all seem to be African American. And, you know, yeah, there are wonderful players of other, you know, ethnic groups that can play the music, and that's wonderful. I mean, it's no different than black musicians playing Bach or Mozart. I mean, why not? I mean, they can do it, sure, you know, but they're not trying to claim the music. No one, I never heard a black person say, you know, Bach was black or Mozart was black, you know, so maybe somebody has, but I've never heard it. So, yeah, I that's a myth I really wish would just die, I mean, and never come back up again, because it's nonsense, really.
Frank Foster said the coolest, succinct, he said, jazz is the experience, came out of the experience of a black musician in America.
Yeah.
And no one's going to ever tell me that. But now our culture is so, he really, he had a very good way of saying it.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think there's some things that we wish had happened differently. For instance, tomorrow is the 100th anniversary of the original Dixieland Jazz Band,
Yes,
right?
it is.
It would have been nice if King Oliver
or Freddie Kepler
could have had that
yeah.
historical distinction.
Yeah, it would have been nice.
And
it would have been nice. And there's controversy there too. I've heard people say that you know, wasn't James Reese Europe really the first person to put jazz on record? I had the guy, he pigeonholed me. It was we were on some panel together, and he got me in a corner. And he was pushing hard and said, "Come on, you have to agree with me that James Reese Europe was I just said, "Listen, man, I know what you're trying to do. I know you don't like the fact that the ODJB, a white group, was the first. This guy happened to be a black Muslim, by the way, and so he was pushing that whole black thing. And I was like, I'm sorry, man. I just can't go with it. I mean, what Europe was playing was peppy and syncopated." But it wasn't jazz in any way, shape, or form. It wasn't jazz, and you can't say that. It's just not true. And even though it was 1914, you can't say it was the first jazz. So he didn't go with it. He still thought I was wrong. But yeah, you're right. I wish that could have. I agree with you. I wish it would have been a little different. Because really, when you hear the ODJB records, I don't want to say they're corny, but
they're corny.
They kind of are, yeah. I mean,
even for I got to think of the time it was, but it wasn't. We know now it wasn't the real thing that could have been captured.
Yeah, exactly. But it's close enough for jazz.
Close enough for jazz. Oh, I love talking to you. I'm not sure I can phrase this question to sort of wrap up. We've been talking about the past, and what's your take on jazz in America now, considering record sales and jazz education and jazz as an art form?
It's all over the place right now. It's interesting that you asked me that question because one of the things that Ed and I, Ed Berger, I keep bringing his name up, and I guess it's because his death is still so fresh in my head. We used to always talk about the fact that we have this chancellor in Newark now. Used to say she's new, but she's been there for a couple of years now, so she's not that new anymore. And she's been trying to use the Institute of Jazz Studies as a sort of a way to, to make to like connect with some of the other cultural organizations in Newark. So we've been partnering with NJPAC for some things, and we've always kind of did that, but now it's more so that's happening. And their jazz program, and also the Newark Museum and the library and other groups similar. And so she sees jazz as kind of a way to bring more notoriety to Rutgers University, and also as a fundraising mechanism, which is interesting considering jazz sales and the popularity of jazz. Also, WBGO is another institution in Newark that we're trying to, kind of partner more with. And we always had sort of partnered with them. We used to have a show on their station called Jazz from the Archives for years before they canceled us. And so really, I see jazz doing a lot of different things. I mean, the fear that it's going to become museum music, is still very much there, because we were talking last night about Fats Navarro and Clifford Brown and Kenny Dorham and stuff like that, and we looked at each other and said, we sound like a bunch of old farts sitting around talking about the good old days. Like, the kids don't know who these people are today. I mean, what are we doing here, But, is this what jazz is now? Just a bunch of old recordings so there's that fear. But, I also saw last Thursday, before coming down here, Valerie, how do you pronounce it? Panamarov? The Russian trumpeter, yes. I always mess up his last name. He had a group of kids. NJPAC has something called Jazz for Teens.
Can you tell me what MJPAC is?
Oh, New Jersey Performing Arts Center.
NJPAC.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. They have a thing called Jazz for Teens. And they have these kids come in, and he is instructing them how to play jazz. And man, these kids, I mean, they couldn't have been any more than maybe 14, 15. And the trumpeter was cool. He was like, he was the leader, de facto leader, because he had on the nice suit and the nice shoes, shiny shoes, and they had a little handkerchief in his pocket and had his hair all slicked back, had his horn. And he was leading them, man, and they're playing, the night in Tunisia, the drummer's doing the thing, and Valerie's sitting next to me, and he's just laughing his butt off because he's just, listen to that, the phrase, they're answering each other, the pianist is answering the guy who's playing the sax, and you see that, and you say, okay, there's a future, that's the future, these kids, they know, man, they obviously been listening, and they've been picking it up, and people like Valerie is hipping them, and so I think jazz is going to be okay. It's never going to be popular like it was in the 30s and 40s. You're never going to see that again. That's gone. That's done. But it's going to be there. If you want to see it, and you know where to find it, you will find it because it'll be there. And you have all these programs still. You have all these colleges with jazz, happening in them. You have master's degrees in jazz history now, so that those people will be out there. So I think it's in good hands. It just isn't going to be like it was in the old days. And I also think that you can always find the kind of jazz you're really interested in. Someone's playing it somewhere. If you like Dixieland, you can find it. There's somebody somewhere doing it. Somebody just told me that there seems to be this now growth in swing bands, like small swing bands, people playing that type of music now more than they did before. And maybe that's happening. That's great. I think the jazz parties are dying. I don't think you have too many more of those anymore.
Yeah, they'll probably go out.
Yeah.
The audience is not sort of fulfilling. It's not coming.
Yeah, that's a shame.
Yeah.
That's a shame. And I don't know about the jazz cruises. I don't know if they're still happening or not. I suppose they're once in a while.
Well, I just talked to someone who went on an incredible jazz cruise.
Mm-hmm.
Like everybody was there.
Okay, so maybe that's another way of getting it out there. And hopefully, what I hope will happen too is, Carol Bash's film, The Lady Who Swings the Band, on Mary Lou Williams just came out. And of course, it's been a while since Ken Burns' film on jazz came out. I think it's time for another film like that, another documentary like that. And some gentleman came to me from some company in Europe, and they did ask me questions for a film that they're doing on jazz, which I hope will come out soon. So somebody else is doing something besides Ken Burns, and I hope there'll be more projects like Carol Bash's latest Swings the Band, get that stuff out on television and so on. So, like somebody once said, you always hear jazz is dead. Every 10 years or so, or 5 years.
What I think about that,
Yeah.
I think they need something to write about.
Yeah, I think
When's
I
the
agree.
last time anybody wrote jazz is dead?
Yeah.
Okay, that was 5 years ago. It's time to do it again.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. But it's not dead. It's not dead. It's alive. It may be on life support somewhat. It's that. but it's still there. It's still there. It's in good hands, and hopefully places like ours and yours, who have these institutes, will keep things going. I mean, you got a great website. You got the YouTube channel, which I got to talk to you about actually. That's great. And YouTube, everything's on YouTube now. It's like, God,
how can it go away?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think it's in good hands. I think it's in really good hands. I'm very optimistic.
And on that upbeat, thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks, Monk. It's a pleasure talking to you as
Okay.
well.